So here I have my practice paper. I'm going to do a few practice mice just to see how they come out. I'm going to take my nice mix of paint on my round brush. It really doesn't matter which brush you use. You can play with different brushes, see which one works the best for you. So we're going to start with a nice point for the nose. And I'm just going to press my brush down pretty hard here, although you really don't need to. I'm going to swish back and forth a little bit because my brush is on the small side, and make a little oval shape for the body. And I have a little bit extra paint there, so I'm going to go ahead and make the tail. One simple, smooth gesture. You don't want to go back over your mouse. Once he's done, he's done. And it's okay if he's not perfect. A little pointy area and a little round ovally area and a tail. It's not that terribly hard. There's a little pointy area for the nose. And come back to a nice little round body. And a little squiggly tail. And I'm slowly lifting the brush off when I'm doing the tail so it gets smaller and thinner there. Let's do another one. Push my brush down, tried spinning it a little bit to see what effect I got with spinning it. And switch back and forth, and do a little tail going at the end. Looks a little furry. Now I'm going to practice my grounds just to see how the brush works on the paper. I'm mixing up my paint pretty well. I'm going to come back over the area there. Now notice I didn't have very wet paint and very little of it on the brush, and so when it went across it left a whole bunch of little wet areas, which looks kind of cool for shimmery water, but not so good for a mouse to be standing on. So let's do another one. A little bit wetter water this time. Notice when I go over it, I'm going over the entire area nice and evenly. I'm not doing piecemeal parts of it. I'm trying to scrub because that'll just make my paint uneven on the ground. Let's go over and do another area. I noticed when I was pressing my brush down, it left a slightly darker area. So I can go back over that and even it out. And I'll go back over the whole thing again. Nice simple we can lift off. Now I didn't get all the way to the edge like I should have, but I don't go back and try to fix it because if you do that, you're just going to mess it up and make it worse. Okay, so I did another one. You can see where I was pressing a little bit more and a little bit less for how even and uneven the paint falls onto the paper. But that's good enough practice for the ground, I think. Well, maybe one more, just for good measure. Slightly different color. This has a little bit of the sepia and the blue there. So you see the brown and the blue in the stroke. And because I didn't go back over it and over mix my palette, you can still see both colors. Notice how my paper has the back and the front, because I marked it when I was tearing it or cutting it. Which you should always do, so you know for the future when you go use the paper. Because the two sides look very similar, and they have slightly different effects when you paint on them. And that varies from brand to brand. So I'm going to go over the ground. Just once, and I'm going to stop. Take my paper towel and clean up the board underneath my paper there. I'm just going to let that be. Dry it off. Try fanning it. Well, you know what? This is going to take a while, so let's go ahead and do another card rather than keep trying to wait for this one to dry. And just set that one aside and pick it up and do another card. Flip it over so it's on the front of the card. This card I apparently hit with my paper cutter because it's got nice sharp edges on it. Now you may notice that my brush is cut off. I like shorter brushes. You should not do that. It's a personal preference on my part. So I take a saw and chop off the end and throw nail polish over it so the wood doesn't collect water. Now notice where the edge was a little bit wetter, it's pushing back into the paint a little bit. I'm going to take my paper towel and clean up the board. Now it's got some collected paint along the side of the paper, and you can get that off just by running the paper towel right along the edge. One smooth swipe and you're done. And that'll keep the paint from bubbling really badly on the end and backflowing into your area like it did in the lower right corner here. You can see that little edging line that's coming up. So that was much drier, and the paint right along the edge was a little bit wetter, and so it pushed back, and it moved the pigment back into the line. So let's do another one on the back of the paper. Let's put it over. Get my cat hair off of my stuff. No matter what I do, there's my cat hair. There we go. Nice simple stroke across. You can tell where I went slower and faster and pushed a little bit harder. It's the pigment. It's a little bit different from the center to the edge there. And you know what? It's okay to have some variety. It gives your painting life. Do not go back over it with your brush 5 million times trying to even it out. It's just leave it. Leave it and let it be. And wipe off the edges here so that I don't have any of that back flow into my painted paper. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do another one. I'm doing all 4 in this video so you can get a feel for how long it's going to take. Notice they go fairly fast. This is just to give you the feel for your paper and your paints. It's just a simple exercise. It's not super finished, beautiful artwork you're going to take to an art gallery. It's just a study. So notice if I press my brush down differently, I can get different amounts of paint out and different variety and different texture. And the brush starts to run out a little bit. It's not the perfect watercolor brush, but it will do. So there's a lot of extra paint on this. So I can pick it up and tilt it, tap it on the board a little bit, rearrange the paint that way if I want. And I get some neat textures doing that. So let it drip around a little bit. Clean up the board, clean up the edges of my card. Notice you could also just tilt the paper around if you wanted to move your paint. Let's set that one aside. Alright, so this one's fairly dry. If it's cool to the touch at all, it will be wet. You don't want to use it. You want these bone dry. We'll see a little bit later why you want it bone dry. So let's go ahead and mix up my paint for my mouse. We're going to pick where we want the head to be. And for our little pointy head, swish back and forth a little bit because the brush is small and the body, it's kind of oval shaped, and it does not have to be perfect in any shape or form. One swipe out to make a tail. Okay, let's go back and move that out a little bit longer. There we go. And I could do that because it was still really wet. Notice the body is a different tone in the middle. It's darker. It's got a darker value. And that's okay. Don't go back over it. Don't swish it around, move it around, adjust the edges. Just leave it. It's okay. Your mouse should have some variety. It should be unique. It should be an expression of yourself. So let's take this one. And make sure that paper is really dry. Can't pick it up. Okay, not quite dry. We'll fan it off a little bit. See how that works. And yes, you can use a hair dryer if you want. You don't have to. It'll speed things up. it's cooler to touch at all, it's still wet. This one feels like it's dry enough for me to carry on. You can see how having the different textures in the ground is actually kind of pretty. Makes it look more lively. Let's take our paint back on our brush again. For the mouse, pick where we want the head. Make this one come down a little bit. Nice little body shape here. And we switch out the tail. And then we stop and leave it alone. Just grab another one. Let's pick where we want our head. Make sure there's no extra bubble of paint on the end of the brush there. Nice pointy face. A little round area for the body. Have an oval. Then down into a tail. Now I want to connect it. I'm going to go ahead and connect it. You don't have to. Now it's interesting to note that the paint flowed back into the tail when I went back and connected them. That's because my brush was wetter than the area that I had painted, and so when I touched it, it flowed back into the tail. And sometimes you don't want that effect, so you have to be very cognizant that that could happen. So let's go and do another one. And this one, when we painted it much wetter, and so it's still pretty damp. You can see that it bowed the paper some, which is fine. It just means the top of the paper is wetter than the underside, and so it causes it to bubble. I'll go ahead and bend that back in. Now I should be waiting for this to completely dry, but I'm not, because I want you to see what happens if you don't wait for it to completely dry. So let's pick a spot for our head. I mean, it looks dry. It feels dry, but it feels a little bit cool. So it's definitely still wet. So when we make our mouse, make our mouse body, we come down over this edge, make our tail, and it immediately bleeds out all over the place. And that's because the paper was still damp. And the paint flowed from the wet area of where I was painting into the slightly damp area next to it. So there we go. Let's move on and paint some details on our other cards. Now these have to be completely dry again because we'll get that bleed out if it's not completely dry. If it's cool to the touch, it's still wet. So what you want to do is you want to take thick paint to do your details. Very, very nice gooey paint that you can paint with so that it stays in place and makes it nice and dark. Gives you a nice dark value. I'm going to paint on some eyeballs. You kind of make a guess at where you want your head to face, and you know, it does not matter. Let's go ahead and add an ear. The top. Add another ear, and these are just little half circles. They're little mountains. Fill in that ear. I think it would look prettier filled in. And a little nose. Bloop. Let's go add some whiskers and a nice quick single swipe, holding it so it's just barely touching the paper. Notice I'm using my super pointy brush too, so that I get a nice thin line. Now rather than try to go across the mouse like that, it's not a comfortable position for painting, so I'm just going to spin my mouse upside down and paint in a direction that's comfortable for me to move my pencil, my paintbrush. So he's starting to look like a little mouse. He's kind of cute. And I like the variety of different values in his back. How it's darker in the one spot and lighter on his head. I just think that's cute. And we'd have lost that if we had gone back over it many times. Now for the front foot, you're just doing a little fan type shape. And you can just suggest it. Your eyes will automatically translate that into a mouse foot. The back foot is kind of a long thing, kind of like your own foot. And so we're just going to do a little long tube type thing and put some little toenails on there for him. So he has some fingers on his back feet. And you can fill it in or not fill it in, whatever strikes your fancy. And if you want, you can come back with your clean, damp brush and blend out just the edge so it doesn't look like it's sitting on top of the mouse. It's actually part of the mouse. You can do the same thing to the insides of the ears if you want. So we'll set that aside and do the details on the next one. It actually helps working on more than one painting at a time so you don't sit there waiting for it to dry, and being tempted to paint when it is not completely dry. So this one's going to kind of face us a little bit better. So a couple of ears. It's got big ears for his head. And a little nose. Taking my clean damp brush to lift off underneath the ear so it blends into his head a little bit better. So it doesn't look like it's just sitting there. Now notice the sepia here that I'm using is very non-staining, so it'll lift off completely if I let it. So I'm being very careful not to lift too much off. And that's just something for your paints you have to know. A couple little whiskers. Again, flip it around so that it's easier to draw my whiskers. There we go. And he needs some hands. Let's go get him a little hand. A little almost round dot for his hands. Notice my paint's a little bit wetter, so I'm having a hard time controlling exactly where it's going. And that's alright. This little tubey shave, this little toenails. There we go. And come back with my clean damp brush. And just touch the ends and blend it out into the body a little bit. Now, because I didn't re-clean my brush when I went to do his upper arm there, I was actually putting a little bit of paint back on, which is why I had to blend it up a little bit higher. A little nose. A little eyeball. Another little eyeball on the opposite side. A couple of ears. I'm just going to follow this spot that's already looks like an ear a bit on his head. Another ear. Yes, I'm not being perfect about this. It's okay. They're actually cuter if they're not perfect. I'm taking my clean damp brush and pulling back a little bit on the edge to kind of blend it in. So it soaks up some of the paint when I do that. More the clean damp brush to kind of lift some of it off. Notice you could keep working on this and working on this and working on this, and the more you work on it, the worse it's going to look. Being able to stop is an important step. And give this one a little mouth. Hand. And a little foot. Now, because the color I was working with is a transparent color, you can see the ground coming through his body there. And that's not necessarily the effect that we would want for our little mice, but it demonstrates the transparent paint effect. it's important to know your paint and your paint properties. And this poor little mouse, we can see now that he's dried that it's blended out quite thoroughly where the paper was damp. And it's not exactly the effective one. We can pretend this mouse is swimming. So we're going to go ahead and put his face and his details on there anyway. He can be found in a bathtub somewhere. Go ahead and add an eyeball. But I'm not even putting the eyeball directly on the mouse at this point. I'm like, that gives it a nice cartoony look. With a little floaty eyeball. Give him some ears. His little feet. Sitting on the water. You can play with things, add a little arm if I feel like it. Yeah, blended in pretty good there. Alright. Let's give him a lower foot. There's not too much we can do to mess this guy up, quite honestly. Let's blend that out with a clean damp brush. And I'm not overworking that because I would be lifting off the paint underneath if I were to sit there and scrub at it. I'm just going very, very lightly when I do that. So we look at his little eyeballs and they look very flat because they don't have any highlights in them. So this is one way to do the highlights. There's a couple of different ways you can do highlights. You could actually use a white Jelly Roll pen. We're using the designer gouache because it's an opaque white that's very nice and thick and will cover up the brown easily. You could use, let's see, I said you could use an X-Acto knife. You could also have used masking fluid to masking fluid out those areas. Although for teeny tiny dots, masking fluid is very challenging. So we're taking it straight out of the tube just because it's nice and thick that way and won't blend. Your eyeballs have to be completely dry for this to work. Otherwise they'll blend out and that white will just disappear. You want your light to come from the same general direction. So if the light's coming from the top left of your painting, you want both dots on the top left of the eyeball, because it'll look kind of strange if both the dots are on the insides of the eyeballs. And notice it didn't come out as white as it did before, and that's because when I touch that sepia immediately lifts off onto my brush, and so I have a little bit of brown on my brush. And don't ever do what I just did, which is take your brush that has a contaminated color back directly into the tube. Hopefully it picked up more white and didn't leave any of that brown in my tube. Everybody makes mistakes somewhere along the line. Add some little white dots on this guy. There we go. And that's how we do our little mouse cards. Oh, he doesn't have any whiskers. He needs some whiskers. Let me go add a little bit of whisker here. And this paint is a little bit darker and wider because I'm pressing down harder on my brush. There we go.